listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. To hear the full show each day, tune in to AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN or log in to accesswdun.com and click the Listen Live button from 9 to 11, Monday through Friday.
Look, I think the way that Governor Newsom has behaved in this whole sorry saga, the more I think about it, the worse it is. The more we're learning about what happened, the real dereliction of duty that he showed is becoming more and more apparent. So instead of actually doing his job, as you say, he's engaging in these kinds of, very personal attacks, trolling President Trump, really playing politics with this instead of actually really trying to run things properly. The specific thing I'm referring to is that we now know that just a little over a week ago, on Friday, when this all started in Los Angeles, ICE officers, federal law enforcement officials, whatever you think about the job that they're doing a job given to them by the President of the United States on a policy platform that he was elected to deliver. They're doing their job. They're being confronted by protesters. They are worried about their safety. They're being they feel under physical threat. They requested help from the LAPD, from the Sheriff's Department, and they were denied. They were denied support and help by local law enforcement. And instead of actually stepping in at that point and Governor Newsom saying, that's not acceptable. We can't allow law enforcement officials to fear for their safety and not protect them. He did nothing. And you hear stories now of local law enforcement kept for 15 hours in a parking lot waiting for orders to deploy as the riots were beginning. Nothing happening.
It is the Martha Zoller Show. That's Steve Hilton. He's running for governor as a Republican in California. And, of course, leading up to the No Kings protests that happened on the weekend, these LA riots were happening. And I think it's kind of interesting if you Google, Siri, AI, Grok, whatever, they are putting a number out there saying that there were 6 million people protesting in the No Kings protests across the country this weekend. The reason why I question that, okay, so I've accepted their numbers in the 5 largest cities because they said that 200,000 people in LA, 100,000 in DC, whatever. So it added up in the 5 major cities about 500,000 people. They say there were 2,300 protests across the country. Only in the big cities did I see big crowds. Now, granted, I don't want to get into the you-know-what match about crowd sizes, but just do the math. Let's assume there's 2,300 of these things. And if you have 2,300 and there were 100 at each one of those, you've got 230,000 people. And you'd have to have had thousands of people at every one to get to that 4 to 6 million people. Even if you assume that the numbers they give you on the 5 biggest cities where they had cameras, a lot more cameras, that happened. So I just wonder if they're taking it from the same people, that Hamas health ministry or something that they used that had all the inflated numbers, because I don't see how you can be sure. And then they want to minimize the people that came out for the Army parade that happened. And just something I want you to know is that the Army parade was started planning under the Biden administration, and the permits were issued under the Biden administration. The Biden administration was planning on having a 250th anniversary parade for the United States Army. It was always in the works. It's a big deal to be the 250th anniversary, and the Army and the Navy preceded our country, the formation of those. So it's important as we kick off into the 250th anniversary. So what's interesting about that is that they want to say that this was something Donald Trump did, and Donald Trump gave a 7-minute speech, in something that lasted from 6:30 to about 10. And so it wasn't about him. He talked about the Army. He can't help it that his birthday is actually June the 14th. It's not like, ironically, the King's birthday was being celebrated in the UK on June the 14th also in something called Trooping the Color, and that is not actually his birthday. His birthday is November the 14th. Okay, so in the UK, they actually celebrate the King's birthday on a day when the weather's better in in June. It's the second Saturday in June usually, so the date changes. But in the United States, where Flag Day was done to recognize the anniversary of the United States Army, as well as this has been in planning for a while, that just because Donald Trump is president, people tried to say it was Donald Trump's. I saw multiple news agencies, and I put that in quote marks, Donald Trump's Army parade. That's not what it was. It was a parade for the United States Army, and you do a disservice to those men that served and gave everything when you call it after the name of a president. Now, I've got some audio I want to play. It's from this guy, Link, somebody who is very funny, but he was talking about as the No Kings protests were going on around the country, the real kings of the Democratic Party were at a wedding.
Fancy wedding as their people, as their party is out there in the streets saying, we don't want kings, we don't want billionaires. We all are clearly fine with billionaires as long as they push the policies you want and as long as their names aren't Donald J. Trump. So there's this article that came out in the New York Times. It says, the Clintons and Kamala Harris descend on a Hamptons wedding of liberal royalty. The wedding of Huma Abedin and Alex Soros, the scion of a liberal philanthropic dynasty, drew a rare concentration of wealth and power. So this article goes through just how over the top this wedding was. Kamala Harris attended this wedding. Bill and Hillary Clinton, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, everybody who's a part of this Democratic elite. They weren't out at the No Kings protest. They wanted you little people to go out to the No Kings protest while they sat around eating crumpets and scones, being billionaires in the freaking Hamptons at a private estate at the wedding of Alex Soros, George Soros' son. So I want to go through a little bit of this article with you guys.
So we're not going to go any more with that but it's so funny that on the day of the No Kings, the actual kings of the Democratic Party were having and the New York Times called it political royalty. So they don't mind using those analogies when you're talking about Democrats. But, it's just, we've got to stop all of this, okay? We've got to stop all of this. We have got to talk about issues. And you know what? In the name of the people that were killed in Minnesota, we need to work together, okay? We've got more ideas that we like than not. And I'm hoping that John Fetterman and Dean Phillips and others like them become the new leaders of the Democratic Party.
It's local radio, and that's why you're listening. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Look, there are a lot of big stories that are happening out there, and I think that it makes people concerned. But I still have this real kind of height of optimism, and it's really surprising to me that in these so-called No Kings protests, it's a lot of really old people that really should be fine with life. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be out protesting. You have the right to protest, okay? You have the right to do things that I disagree with, and you have a right, but I have the right to say what I think about them. Free speech is a two-way street, okay? You have the right to say you don't like Donald Trump. I have the right to ask you why. I have the right to say you're being unreasonable, okay? This business of having protests every week and you're spending a large part of your free time every week planning to be negative over the weekend. Maybe you're on your way to the ice cream store too. I hope you're getting some ice cream and having some fun with your grandkids and doing some other things there. I hope. But what it looks to me like, it's people that, I used the analogy with Logan earlier today where Donald Trump is not a straight down the line conservative. If you say that he is, you're just not telling the truth. Okay. And there are some things that he's a little more to the left. In fact, he has taken the Republican Party from being kind of a neocon pro-war party to being a party that wants to avoid forever wars because they learned from the mistakes that we made in Iraq and Afghanistan. I do not think it was wrong that we went in there. What I think was wrong about it, and I supported the war, was that we didn't have a way to get out. Okay, we didn't have a clear, this is what victory looks like. Okay, so I think that was the major problem with that. But in all the things that we do, I think that it's really important that people understand what is happening related to the Republican Party. So Donald Trump has taken a more I don't want to say left-leaning, but he's more on the side of the Democrats when you talk about what his positions are about war. And, of course, now the Democrats, take a different position on that. I was making the analogy to Logan earlier today that if all of a sudden Trump adopted every position, so if you're going to buy what Roy said at the beginning of the program, that he'll change his mind if he hears things aren't popular, and again, I think that's a pragmatist, that if he all of a sudden had all the positions of Bernie Sanders, then Bernie Sanders would be opposed to all those positions. I don't think that Bernie Sanders would come up and say, hey, President Trump, I'm not going to try to do a Bernie Sanders impersonation. Hey, President Trump, now we're on the same side of these issues. Let's work together. But here's what ought to be happening. And this is a story I heard about Melissa Hortman, who was the speaker that was killed in Minnesota a couple of nights ago, Saturday night, that when she got a group of people together that disagreed on a bill, which she had to do a lot because she was the Speaker of the House, there was a book she gave out, and I haven't looked it up, so I hope I get this title right, called How to Get to Yes in a Negotiation. And she gave that out to everyone. Kind of reminds me of what I used to do with this book called The Roots of Freedom, which talks about what classical liberalism is, which is really what conservatism is today. Conservatism today is what classical liberalism was in the 18th century. Okay? And so that's kind of where we are. Everything goes back and forth. Everything old is new again. People change positions and they change labels and they do all that kind of stuff. So Roy's position is kind of interesting because just look at history. Look at the history of the Democratic Party. Okay, the Democratic Party was born out of defending slavery. Okay? It was born out of defending slavery. After the Civil War, the Ku Klux Klan came out of the Democratic Party. Okay? Then throughout the early 1900s, the Democratic Party was the party of eugenics and of really kind of the party that led to what the Nazis became in Germany, where they believed there was this superior race. Just go back and read Woodrow Wilson, folks, if you think I'm lying to you. He's one of the great Democrats of the early 20th century. So then this kind of, and they lost a lot of elections with those points of view. They were in the wilderness from the 1870s until the 1940s. The Democrats were. Early 1940s, maybe mid-1930s. But there was a long period of time that Democrats were in the wilderness. And maybe they've forgotten that lesson because they're about to put themselves back in the wilderness again. Okay? Then FDR came along. And with FDR was the beginnings of the African-American vote coming to the Democrats. Just the beginnings, because still primarily African-Americans voted Republican. Why? Because the Republicans were the party of Lincoln, and Lincoln freed the slaves. You got to remember, in the 1930s, there were still people that remembered the Civil War living. Not many, but there were still some. Or in the 1920s. So this came along. Then if you read the books, my favorite books, yes, I'm a geek, I'll admit it. It's Robert Caro's Master of the Senate. There are 3 books in this series, and they're long and arduous. Literally, it took me almost a year to read all 3 of the books. But in Master of the Senate, Lyndon Johnson, who was a Democrat, one of the 22 Democrat senators, he realized that if Democrats were ever going to win again, and at that point they'd won the House back and they'd kept the House, but they were having trouble winning presidencies. Okay? So you had some issues there. And so he began to embrace African Americans. And then that began in 1958 with the Civil Rights Act. You saw in 1960 for the first time a majority of black people voted for a Democrat. They voted for JFK. And then with JFK's assassination, and I just please take this in the spirit in which it's intended, LBJ saw an opportunity to politicize the death of the president. He didn't say that verbally, but what he did was he embraced legislation that Democrats were having a hard time getting passed, which were the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and played them up as Kennedy's legacy. And then he was able to get both of them passed with about half of the Democrat senators and about half of the Republican senators, and were able to get that passed. And from that point until this past election, African Americans predominantly voted for Republicans. Okay? So, and again, it's not a majority voting for, I'm sorry, African Americans predominantly voted for Democrats. Sorry, I want to get that correct. And it was not a majority at all that voted for Trump this time, but prior to Donald Trump, those numbers were in the 3 to 5% range voting for Republicans and 95% running for Democrats. And in this last Trump election, 25% of African American males voted for Trump, 75% voted against, and about 6% of African American women voted for Trump. So overall, the number was in the 8 to 12% range of African Americans that voted for Donald Trump. But those numbers are increasing. And all you got to do is look at side-by-side views of these protests versus Trump events. The protest is mostly old white people. Okay? Old white people. And that is usually what you see in these protest pictures, these No Kings pictures, mostly. What you see in whether it's the U.S. Army parade or other Trump events are young families of color, whether they're Hispanic, black, and then some white people and some other things. So it's very interesting how this juxtaposition is happening, this transfer is happening. And I know it's really uncomfortable for people like Ed and Roy and others, Otis, who have been lifelong Democrats and independents, seeing this shift happening, because for most of their adult life, they thought they knew what Republicans were. And I don't think we even know what we are anymore. I know I'm conservative. I know the Republican Party is for lower taxes, smaller government, but they haven't been voting that way until recently. We're finally getting, as conservatives, what we want related to business in the Trump administration. And I'm excited to see it happen.
Putting the talk in news talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, love him or hate him, think he's a horrible guy or not, he is unabashedly a proud American. And he went on The View yesterday, and they thought they were going to get him to say bad things about ICE. But here's what they got instead.
You are an immigrant. You're an immigrant in this country. Yeah. Did you have a visceral reaction to what they're doing, what ICE is doing, when you see the videos of it?
Well, I tell you, you said that the immigrant, I'm so proud and happy that I was embraced by the American people like that. I mean, imagine I came over here with the age of 21 with absolutely nothing. And then to create a career like that. I mean, in no other country in the world could you do that. Yeah. Every single thing, if it's my bodybuilding career, if it's my acting career, becoming governor, the beautiful family that I've created, all of this is because of America.
That's true.
And so this is why I'm so happy to see firsthand that this is the greatest country in the world, and this is the land of opportunity. And I think because I'm such a proud American and a proud immigrant that came to America, I was asked to do, on July 4th, a big speech, the keynote speech at Mount Vernon, where George Washington was laid to rest, and where he lived and all that, to celebrate the 250th anniversary of America, the existence of America. And I will be doing the speech there. They asked me because I'm an immigrant, and there will be 7,000 some people there, and there will be people that will be sworn in and will become citizens that day.
That's great.
So it's really a great celebration. And this is what this is all about, is to celebrate people becoming Americans and coming to America and all that. And so I just think the world of the great kind of history that we have with immigrants in America. But the key thing also is at the same time that we got to do things legal. That is the important thing, you know. So you got to do things legal, and those people that are doing illegal things in America and that are foreigners, they are not smart Because when you come to America, you're a guest. And you have to behave like a guest. Like when I go to someone's house and I'm a guest, then I will do everything I can to keep things clean and to make my bed and to do everything that is the right thing to do rather than committing a crime or being abusive or something like that. So that doesn't really work in this country. So I think the important thing is when you become an immigrant to think about, okay, I go to America because I want to use America for the great opportunities that America has in education, in jobs, creating a family, all of those kind of things. Then you have to think about, okay, if I get all of those things from America, then I have to give something back. You have a responsibility as an immigrant to give back to America and to pay back to America and to go and do something for your community for no money whatsoever. Give something back to after-school programs, Special Olympics, or whatever it is. Make this country a better place.
It is the Martha Zoller Show. Wow. I mean, look, he turned them on their heels. I'm sure they thought that, he's a more liberal Republican. Let's just face it. He is. Okay. He was the governor of California. He was married into the Kennedy family, all of that kind of stuff. But what he was saying was the way I hear legal immigrants talk is they think you got to come here and do it the right way. You got to come in here and follow the rules, just like the lady we talked about last week and I reminded you of today, where she was here illegally with her 2 children, but she was so terrified of being deported that she saved up the money, she went back to her home country, and then she came back in the legal way so that nobody could ever say to her, you have to leave. And, it is a gift to be able to come to the United States of America. It is not something you should break into. Okay, you should not break into the United States of America. And what happened is we're kind, compassionate people. We allow the immigration of 1.1 million people a year, which is more than the rest of the world combined. We are a kind, generous people. And you come in and you say, and we think we're being nice when we say that. We're saying, hey, come on in. We'll help you with this. We'll get you some diapers, whatever. We'll get you a hearing, whatever. And then you start giving up the rules, and then more and more and more people come. And that's what we saw happen under the Biden administration. It got to a level that we could not sustain. That's what happened back in 1924 when the immigration population got to be so high that the government of our country said, we've had enough people. We've got to severely limit immigration while these people are assimilating. Now, people have said that was racist, and I don't know if it was racist or not. The people they were trying to keep from coming in were people from Europe, and they were mostly white. Okay? There weren't that many brown people coming to the United States of America back in those days. You could count in the hundreds people that were immigrating from places like Africa or South America or India or other places like that. It wasn't large numbers of people. The people they were largely trying to stop were people from Europe that were coming in. Go back and look at the numbers. You've just accepted, not you, but a lot of people have just accepted this idea, we shut down immigration in 1924 because we were a bunch of racists. Well, who do they say in the legislation they're trying to keep out? Italians, Greeks, Spanish. Those are not people that are different races, not from Europe anyway. I mean, if you go to South America, there's every race in the rainbow that are under that umbrella of speaking Spanish in that country or under that umbrella of the country. But if you go to those countries, they've got a little bit of discrimination between people that are, quote, Castilian, which means they came out of Spain, or Indian or native. They probably don't call them Indian anymore. They used to. It was a big deal a few years ago when in Ecuador, the first Native American president was elected because he didn't look like a white Spaniard. Okay? So you want to buy all of this because you want to believe the worst about America. And what I say to you and what Arnold Schwarzenegger is saying to you, if you want to believe the worst about America, then go. You don't have to stay here. I was looking at a quote we won't get to today from Ilhan Omar, talking about how terrible this country is. You ran for election to be a representative of the United States of America as a naturalized citizen, and all you have to say about America is terrible things? Why? Why? I want to live. You can call me Pollyanna, you can call me naive, but I want to live in the world where I have opportunity because I'm an American, where people want to come to our country. People want to engage. Yesterday I was at an event and I got to speak to a number of people from different countries. And I'm thinking to myself, this is what we want. This is the greatest country in the history of the world that came out of a Judeo-Christian background, but also came out of the British form of government. We need to look at that. We need to look at that. So this is the greatest country in the world, and I'm very happy that Arnold Schwarzenegger talks about this country that way, because he's had ups and downs. Mostly ups. He's a very rich man, but he had a very public divorce with a very embarrassing revelations about things that he had done. But here's the difference. He took responsibility for his own actions and for the destruction of his family. He didn't blame it on the country. He didn't blame it on the fact he was an immigrant. He didn't blame it on anything else. He blamed himself. And that's what we got to get back to. We got to get back to, I was reading these articles. Evidently, the mainstream media wants you to believe that the No Kings protest gave a infusion of positive activity into the Democratic Party. No, they didn't. It just showed how out of touch they were. It just showed how out of touch they are. And hey, I hope they keep it up, because I think conservative values are the best, and I think our country does better when we're governed conservatively. To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.